functions for working with C strings. These are distinct from the C++ STL string class that's commonly used with C++. C strings are simple, efficient, and flexible, and are often used where the complexity and power of the C++ string class is not necessary. So let's make a working copy of string.c, and I'm going to paste this into our working project here. I'll go ahead and maximize this. So up at the top here, I defined some constants and some variables that we'll be using throughout this code. There's maxBuff, which is for the size of the character buffers in SD1 and SD2 on lines 9 and 10. There's a couple of constant strings, string 1 and string 2, an integer, a character pointer, and those are all initialized to null. So let's bring this back down to size and run it, and then we'll walk through the code and you can see what's going on. So I save that and compile and run it. And if we come up here to the top and we will take a look here, our first printfs are just printing out these strings and sizes that we defined at the top. So S1 is string 1 and S2 is string 2. So that first printf says S1 is string 1, S2 is string 2. And size of our two buffers are both 128. And then we come down here. I'm just going to minimize this little thing off to the side here so that you can see the rest of this. And I might as well do this as well with our Project Explorer. So then we come down here on line 18, and we're going to copy our constant string into our buffer SD1. And we do this with the str_n_copy function. Now, str_n_copy takes 3 arguments: the destination string, the source string, and the maxBuff. And remember, maxBuff is 128, and our buffers are that size. So what this argument does in str_n_copy is str_n_copy will now copy up to maxBuff number of bytes minus 1, and then it'll add a null byte at the end. And so we see that after the str_n_copies, we have these printfs. SD1 is string 1 and SD2 is string 2. So the next function we're going to look at is str_ncat. And what this does is it concatenates 2 strings. The first argument is the destination string, and the second argument is the string that's going to get concatenated onto the end of it. So in the example on line 23, we're going to add a space and a dash and a space, and then in line 24, we're going to add string 2. And then the third argument, and this is what's interesting here, because what I have here in this example is actually just a little bit wrong. What this is, it's not the size of the destination buffer. Rather, it's the number of characters to copy over. In this case, we have the maxBuff minus the str_len, which we'll get to in a moment, but that's the length of the source string, the SD1. And that's actually really 1 byte too many, because it's the maximum number of characters to copy over. In this case, and in many cases, it might work just fine, but you really need to subtract 1 more so that there's room for that null byte. So I'm just going to add that -1 to both of these, and then we'll compile and run it again. Of course, this has been working just fine because our buffer was actually big enough for those strings, but you want to be safe. And so you're always going to want to, in str_ncat, you want to remember that that third argument length is not the size of the destination buffer. It's actually the maximum number of characters that you want to copy. So you need to subtract the size of whatever's already in that buffer, and you need to subtract 1 more so that you have room for the null byte. And then we see it says SD1 is string 1 dash string 2. So that's how that works. Now, we're going to come down here to line 27, and we're taking string lengths, and we see the length of string 1 is now 23, and the length of string 2 is 10. If each of these is 10, string 1 and string 2, and then this part here is 3, so we see that that length is 23. So this simply goes to the string and it counts all of the characters up until it sees a null byte. The next function we're going to look at is str_compare, strcmp. That's for comparing strings. Str_compare returns a 0 if the strings compare, and it returns a positive or a negative number if they are greater than or less than each other. So it's not actually comparing the length of them, it's actually comparing them as a sort of an alphabetical, but it's based on the ASCII character set. For some usages, it's actually pretty useful. you can usually manipulate the strings into a state where it'll do a decent job of alphabetizing a list. But this is basically how it works. It takes the two strings, string 1 and string 2, and it compares them. And you'll see in the first example on line 30, we're comparing SD1 and SD2, our two destination strings. And you'll notice that we get a difference of -5, and they're not equal. And in line 32, you see we're comparing two equal strings, SD2 and S2, our constant string, and it finds that they are equal. Starting on line 35, we're going to find a character in a string, and this is with strchr, strchr. The first argument is the string to search, and the second argument is the character. In this case, we're looking for a G in the string, and you remember the first word in this string is the word string, and so G is the 5th character. It's at position 5, is actually the 6th character, because all of this is 0-based. And then starting on line 40, we have str. This is for finding a string in a string. The first argument is the string to search. The second argument is the string to find in the first argument. And here we're looking for string 1 in SD1. And actually that's a typo there. Look at that. It should be string 2 in there. And so if I recompile it, it was just an error in the printf. Did we find string 2 in SD1? And yes, we did. And we found it at position 13. And you remember we had the 10 character string, and then we have the space and the dash and the space, and so position 13 would be right after that. So here are the function signatures for the functions we've used in this lesson. We have strncopy, strncat, strcompare, strlen, strchar, and strstring. Now let's delete the working file and run clean to get set up for the next lesson.